"You're fired." Edward's voice echoed through the cold marble hall, the words slashing through the silence. Maya's heart raced, but she didn't flinch. She had seen this coming. "I won't beg," she whispered, turning away. The heavy door slammed behind her, leaving the billionaire alone in his empty office. His fingers trembled as he watched her walk away. He had no idea who he was firing, no idea what she was capable of. The night swallowed her, and with it, the chance to fix everything he had broken. But that was just the beginning. Little did he know Maya was about to change everything, without ever looking back. Maya's feet slapped against the wet pavement as she walked away from the mansion, the wind biting at her cheeks. She didn't look back. The sound of the door slamming, Edward's final words, echoed in her head, but she swallowed them down. She had no time for regret. Her mother's old coat, threadbare and stiff, wrapped tight around her shoulders, offering no warmth against the cold, but it was all she had. She held onto that coat like it was the last piece of dignity she had left. The streetlights flickered above her, casting long shadows, and she kept walking, not knowing where, just away. She couldn't think about the warmth she had lost, or the small bed she would return to. A bed that had never quite been big enough, but it was hers. She could make do with less. She always had. Her footsteps grew heavier, but the air felt thick, heavy with what wasn't said. Maya had learned long ago that the world wasn't kind to people like her. People who worked with their hands, cleaned the homes of the powerful, and disappeared when the work was done. But that didn't mean she couldn't find peace in herself, in the work she did, even if the world refused to see it. In the broken cafe on the corner, she stopped and pulled out $1 from her coat pocket. The change in her hand felt light, almost nothing. But she could buy a cup of coffee, and for that moment it was enough. She sat by the window, the street bustling outside, but all she could hear was her own breath, slow and steady. Life had always been a battle for Maya. But what was a battle if you didn't have something to fight for? She couldn't think of Edward, not now. Not when there was so much left for her to do. The coffee was bitter, but it warmed her just enough to think clearly. She had to keep moving, keep fighting. That was the only thing that mattered. She glanced at her phone, the time blinking back at her. 9:30 p.m. She hadn't realized how late it was. The cafe was quiet now, the workers cleaning up, just like the people who cleaned the rich homes, the people who never stayed long enough to be noticed. But Maya would never forget the way it felt to walk away from that house. She might have lost the battle, but the war wasn't over. Not yet. She would find a way to make the world see her. She would make sure they saw her. The gala was in full swing. Edward stood at the center of the grand ballroom, a glass of champagne in hand, his expensive suit tailored to perfection. His eyes swept over the room, well-dressed guests laughing, exchanging business cards, their voices a low hum in the background. The soft flicker of crystal chandeliers overhead cast a warm glow, but the warmth didn't reach him. He could feel the weight of the world's expectations pressing against his chest. The laughter, the smiles, it all felt so far away. He was a part of it, but not really. He was playing a role. He always did. Across the room, his associates, those with connections, power, money, exchanged words like currency. They were already discussing the next big deal, the next step to expand their wealth. Everything, from the paintings on the walls to the imported wine, screamed success. But Edward felt distant from it all, as if the luxury around him was a farce, something that existed in the world of the untouchable, the ones who never had to fight for their place. He looked around, scanning the crowd for any face he recognized, but there was nothing personal about any of them, just business, just faces in a sea of connections. The staff moved through the room, silent shadows in black uniforms, carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres, their heads down. They were ghosts, fleeting, unnoticed. He caught a glimpse of one woman's face, a young maid with dark hair, eyes focused on her work. But there was something about her posture, the way she moved, that caught his attention. He blinked, the thought slipping away like smoke before he could catch it. The event was for the powerful, the ones who had everything. But there was something cold about it all, this world where every conversation felt like a transaction. There was no real connection. Just people dressed in expensive clothes pretending to care. And then there was the staff, the ones who lived on the edges of the rooms they served. Maya had been one of them. She had been part of the world he moved in, but invisible. It wasn't personal. Couldn't be. In this world, there was no room for empathy, no time for humanity. There was only wealth and the power it gave. As the night dragged on, Edward's thoughts drifted back to Maya. He hadn't seen her in months, but the image of her standing in the doorway, her dignity, her quiet strength, kept replaying in his mind. He looked out at the crowd again, at the perfect lives they led, and for the first time he realized he was searching for something that couldn't be bought. The conference room buzzed with low murmurs, the kind of chatter that came with important decisions and high stakes. Edward Hawthorne sat at the head of the table, surrounded by suits and tie-clad figures, all leaning over glossy folders filled with potential contracts, business deals, and financial projections. The window behind him revealed the city sprawled below, a skyline of glass and steel that spoke to the empire he had built. An empire that demanded control, power, and perfection. Maya stood at the back of the room, holding a tray of drinks, her movements as quiet and unseen as usual. She had been working at Hawthorne Investments for 2 years now, but she was just another piece of the furniture, invisible to the billionaires who gathered here to make the world bend to their will. But today was different. A slight tremor passed through her hands as she moved toward the table, the weight of the tray pressing down, just as it always did. It was supposed to be another simple day. Serve drinks, keep quiet, fade into the background. But then it happened. Edward's voice cut through the chatter. "This merger is crucial," he said, a hard edge to his tone. "We can't afford any mistakes. Get it right, or I'll be the one to fix it." One of the men seated at the table, a partner from a rival firm, leaned forward with a sly smile. "You're always the one fixing things, Edward," he said. "Maybe that's why you're so good at what you do." The room laughed, but the tension in the air didn't fade. Maya felt it. The same cold, invisible pressure that made her heart race, her chest tighten. She tried to ignore it, but the words echoed in her mind. "Get it right, or I'll be the one to fix it." Maya wasn't an expert in mergers, or contracts, or business deals. She had never been trained for anything beyond cleaning, beyond serving. But that didn't stop her from noticing the small detail. The clause in the contract. She had been wiping the glass door when she caught a glimpse of it. Something buried in the fine print. Something that didn't sit right. Her eyes lingered for a moment, a pang of unease building in her gut. The clause shifted the entire liability of the merger to Hawthorne Investments, leaving the rival firm free of any risk. Maya had no business reading contracts. She had no right to point out mistakes, especially in front of men like this. But the longer she stood there, the more the words gnawed at her. "This could bankrupt us," she thought, the words running through her mind like a chant. She couldn't ignore it. Not now. The risk was too great. Without thinking, without warning, Maya stepped forward, breaking the silence. "Excuse me, Mr. Hawthorne," she said, her voice steady but sharp. The room fell quiet, every head turning toward her. Edward's gaze was cold, confused. "What is it, Maya?" he asked, his tone flat, as if he couldn't quite place her. "Just another servant in the room, nothing more." "That clause," she said, her voice rising just enough to be heard. It's not right. It's designed to let the other company walk away from any risk." A heavy pause followed her words, as the men around the table shifted in their seats, some exchanging glances. Edward's face hardened, his jaw tightening. "Maya, we don't need your input on this. You're here to serve, not to question the deal," he said, his voice cold with authority. "I'm sorry, sir, but if you sign this, if you agree to this, your company could be ruined." The room went still. The weight of her words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Maya's heart raced, but she didn't back down. She couldn't. "I know I'm just a maid," she said, her words cutting through the tension like a knife. "But I can see what's in front of me. And if you don't pay attention, everything you've built, it'll be gone. The silence in the room was deafening. Edward's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening on his glass, his knuckles whitening. "You should leave," he said, his voice a low growl. "Now." Maya's breath caught in her throat. She knew the consequences. She could lose her job. She could be thrown out into the streets. She could be nothing again. But she stood tall, her heart pounding in her chest, her voice unwavering. "I'm just trying to help," she said, her gaze holding steady. "You can fire me if you want. But this is bigger than me." Edward stared at her for a long moment, the tension in the room palpable. Then, without a word, he turned his back on her, his attention shifting back to the contract. Maya stood there, breathless, for a beat longer. Then, without another glance, she turned and walked out of the room. She didn't know what would happen next. But one thing was certain. She had just made a choice that would change everything. Maya stood in the hallway, her hands clammy around the doorframe, the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. Her heart raced, thumping hard against her ribs as if trying to break free. She had just said something that she could never take back. She had spoken out of turn, broken the silence that had always kept her in her place. Now she could feel the eyes of the room on her, sharp, burning, accusing. Edward Hawthorne stood at the front, the billionaire who held everything in his hands, but right now his gaze felt like a weapon. "I told you to leave," he said, his voice low, clipped. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was something colder. Dismissal. Contempt. "You've crossed a line, Maya." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of all the things he didn't need to say. Maya's stomach twisted. She could feel the blood draining from her face, the heat rising to her skin as her chest tightened. She had spoken out because it was the right thing to do, but now she saw the consequences. No one cared about what was right. Not here. Not in this world. "You have no business questioning these deals," Edward continued, stepping closer, his voice carrying the icy authority that came with years of power. "This is not your place. You're a maid. That's all you are." Her breath caught in her throat. She could feel her legs shake beneath her, but she stood her ground, unwilling to back down. She had made the choice, and there was no going back. She started, her voice trembling, but she quickly silenced herself. This wasn't the time for apologies. Not when everything was on the line. "Enough," Edward snapped, cutting her off. "You've embarrassed me. You've embarrassed this company. Do you realize what you've done?" Maya opened her mouth to speak, but the words died in her throat. The room had gone deathly quiet, save for the sounds of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She could feel the eyes of everyone on her, the silent judgment. They weren't looking at her with respect, with understanding. They were looking at her like she was a mistake. A flaw in the system they had all worked so hard to build. A mistake they were determined to correct. "Get out," Edward said, his voice steely, but there was something darker underneath, disdain. "Now." The words were like a slap, stinging her face. Maya's mind raced. She should have just walked out when he first told her to leave. She should have kept her head down, kept quiet. But something had made her speak. Something in her had snapped. She had tried to do the right thing, and this was the price she had to pay. "Mr. Hawthorne, please, Maya started, but the words stumbled from her lips weak, as if the breath had been knocked out of her. "Please what?" Edward's voice was sharp, unforgiving. "What do you want from me? A medal? A thank you for your service? You're a maid, Maya. A maid. You don't get to play in this world. You don't get to speak up like you're one of us." The venom in his words stung. Every syllable felt like a blade, cutting deeper than she ever thought it would. She had spent years working for him, years putting her best effort into everything she did. And this was how it ended. In front of all these men. In front of all the people who held the power, the wealth. She was nothing more than a tool to them. She wasn't even human in their eyes. "Leave. Now." Edward's voice was final. His words dropped like a guillotine. Maya took a step back, her body trembling. She could feel the weight of the room closing in on her, pushing her out, making her smaller still. The humiliation twisted in her gut like a wound that wouldn't heal. She had nothing to say, no defense, no justification. Just the cold, bitter truth. She was nothing. And that truth, seeing it in their eyes, hearing it in his voice, it broke her. Maya turned without saying another word, her feet dragging as she walked away from the room, from the table where the men sat, from the life she had tried so hard to be a part of. She could feel their eyes on her, watching her every move, silently cheering her failure. She had been nothing but a pawn, a piece of furniture in their world, and now even that was being taken away from her. The heavy door closed behind her with a final thud, and the sound reverberated in her chest. She stood in the hallway, the cold air pressing against her face, her heart sinking lower with every second. She was alone. She had always been alone. The city outside the window seemed so far away, a distant world she could never touch. But now, more than ever, it felt like the only place she could escape to. She couldn't go back. Not now. Not after what she had seen. The weight of the humiliation, the pressure, it was too much. She wanted to scream, to shout, but all that came out was a quiet sob, her breath shaking in the cold air. She wiped her eyes quickly, swallowing the pain. But no matter how much she wiped it away, it would never go. It would always be there. She turned, walking slowly down the hallway, the sharp click of her heels echoing in the silence. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew one thing. She would never be the same. She had crossed a line, and now she had to live with the consequences. What happened next? Maya didn't know, but one thing was certain, nothing in her life would ever be the same again. Maya stood on the sidewalk, the sound of her footsteps swallowed by the hum of the city. The cold air bit at her skin, sharp and unforgiving. She had walked for what felt like hours, but the streets were still unfamiliar, as if they had changed while she wasn't looking. She didn't know where she was going. She just needed to keep moving. The sky overhead was gray, heavy with clouds, the kind that promised rain but never delivered. It was the kind of day that made everything feel muted, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Maya wrapped her coat tighter around her, trying to hold onto the warmth that seemed to slip through her fingers. But the cold wasn't just outside. It was inside her too, settling deep into her bones. She paused, standing under a street lamp, the flickering light casting long shadows across the empty street. The lamp's glow felt distant, like it was trying to reach her, but never quite making it. The world was quiet here. No cars rushing by, no voices calling out. Just the sound of her own breathing, shallow and uneven. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the day settle in her chest. The humiliation, the pressure, the anger. It was all too much, too raw. But there was something else, too. Quiet realization. The kind that crept up on you when you least expected it. She had walked away. She had chosen to walk away. It had been her decision, and it wasn't about the job or the money or the status. It had been about something deeper. Something she couldn't name yet, but something that burned in her chest, steady and sure. Maya opened her eyes and looked down the street, the city stretching out before her. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew she couldn't go back. Not to the life she had left behind. Not to the people who only saw her as a tool to be used. The wind picked up, swirling around her, tugging at the edges of her coat. She stood there for a long time, the world moving around her, but she stayed still, rooted to the spot. The quiet wasn't empty. It was full. Full of the things she had left unsaid, full of the choices she had made. And for the first time in a long while, Maya felt something that wasn't shame or anger or fear. It was peace. The kind of peace that comes when you stop running, stop pretending, and let yourself be. She didn't know what would happen next, but for now that was enough. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the cold air, and let it out slowly, as if releasing everything she had been holding on to. Her heart slowed, the rhythm steadying. It was like she was finally starting to breathe again. The city around her still felt distant, but the noise, the pressure, the weight, somehow it seemed quieter. like it no longer had the power to reach her. She glanced up at the sky again, the clouds still hanging low, the light fading. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She wasn't sure where she was going, but she knew she had already begun the journey. One step at a time. Edward sat at his desk, his fingers drumming nervously against the wood, his mind spinning. The deal had been finalized. The contracts had been signed. The merger was done, the company on its way to a brighter future, or so he thought. But something gnawed at him, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. It wasn't just Maya. No, it was the way she had stood there in that conference room, speaking so plainly, so confidently, about something she had no right to know. He tried to shake it off, tried to focus on the stacks of paperwork on his desk, but it kept coming back to him. Those words, her voice, the look in her eyes. She had been so sure, so certain that something was wrong. "I've made a mistake," he muttered to himself, but the thought only seemed to grow louder in his mind. He hadn't listened. He hadn't even considered the possibility that she could be right. His fingers stopped drumming, and his gaze shifted to the stack of contracts, still waiting to be filed away. It was as if the room had closed in around him, the walls pressing against him as the weight of the mistake he had made settled into his chest. "How did I miss it?" he whispered. Just as he reached for the pile of papers, the door opened. Clara, his right-hand assistant, stepped inside, her expression tight. "Mr. Hawthorne," she said, her voice calm but strained. "We need to talk." Edward looked up at her, his brow furrowing. "What is it, Clara? I've got a full schedule today." Clara stepped forward, holding a document in her hand. "This just came through," she said, placing the paper on the desk. "It's from the legal team. They've reviewed the merger agreement, and—" Her voice trailed off, her eyes flicking to the paper, then back to him. Edward's heart skipped a beat. He glanced at the document, then back at her, his mind racing. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice tight. Clara hesitated for a moment before speaking. "It's the clause, the one Maya pointed out." Edward's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't expected this. "What about it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara's eyes met his, and for the first time he saw something in her face, a flicker of uncertainty. "It's as bad as she said. Worse, actually. The way the clause is worded, it's going to leave Hawthorne Investments exposed. The rival firm has no risk at all, while we're liable for everything. If something goes wrong, the company could collapse." Edward's mind reeled. He grabbed the paper, his eyes scanning the lines of text, but the words seemed to blur together. The reality of what he had almost signed hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a bad deal. This was catastrophic. "How did I miss this?" he muttered again, more to himself than anyone else. "We reviewed it a dozen times," Clara said quietly, "but I think we all missed it, because we didn't want to see it." Edward sat back in his chair, his body suddenly heavy. "Maya," he whispered, almost in disbelief. She was right. She was right all along. The truth hit him hard, like the weight of 1,000 mistakes crashing down on him all at once. Maya had been nothing more than a maid to him, someone who didn't belong in the room, someone who had no right to speak out. And yet, she had seen the truth. She had noticed the details that everyone else had overlooked. "I've ruined everything," Edward said, his voice hollow. Clara stood there in silence, watching him, her expression unreadable. It wasn't pity, not exactly, but something close. She had seen this before. She had seen him build an empire, and now she was watching him watch it crumble. "What do we do now?" Clara asked, her voice steady. Edward ran a hand through his hair, his mind working at 1,000 miles an hour. He knew what he had to do. He had to fix this. He had to make it right. But how? "Where is she?" he asked, his voice sharp now, tinged with desperation. Clara blinked, her gaze shifting to the door. "Who?" "Maya," Edward snapped, his patience wearing thin. "Where is she? I need to find her. Now." Clara hesitated, then sighed. "I don't know, sir. She left the office the day you fired her. No one's seen her since." Edward's heart sank. He had fired her. He had pushed her out. And now, the one person who could save them, who could save everything, was gone. She was right, he said again, this time with more conviction. She was right, and I didn't listen. I can't lose her now. He stood up from the desk, pacing the room. We need to find her. I need to apologize. I need to make this right. Clara watched him, her eyes narrowed as if she were considering something, weighing it in her mind. Finally, she spoke. Edward, she might not want to help you. The words hit him like a slap. He stopped pacing, his breath catching in his throat. What? Clara looked at him, her expression softening. She might not want to fix this for you. Not after the way you treated her. Edward's mind raced. He had always been the one in control. He had always been the one who called the shots. But now he was the one who needed help. And the person he had cast aside, the person he had dismissed without a second thought, was the one who could save him. The shift in power was brutal, and it left Edward feeling exposed, vulnerable. I'll find her, he said, his voice tight. And when I do, I'll make it right. Edward stepped out of the car, his breath visible in the cold air. The city around him sprawling like a quiet sea of glass and steel. He had been searching for hours, driving through streets that all felt the same, looking for her, Maya. The guilt had settled deep in his chest, weight that no amount of success could lift. He had come so close to losing everything, and it was because of her, because he had ignored her. He knew that finding her wouldn't fix things, but he had to try. He had to show her that he understood, that he was sorry. The apartment building was modest, tucked away between two towering skyscrapers, almost hidden from view. He stood outside for a moment, his gaze drifting to the window, where the light flickered softly. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, not with hope, but with fear. Fear that it was too late. Fear that she had moved on. Fear that he had made a mistake that he could never undo. He knocked once, the sound sharp in the silence of the street. A moment passed before the door creaked open. There she was, standing in front of him, Maya. She looked the same, but different, as if the weight of everything that had happened had already started to change her. Her eyes were calm, almost resigned, but there was something else there, something he couldn't name. Maya, Edward said softly, his voice cracking. I've been looking for you. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, her hands folded in front of her, watching him. She didn't look angry or hurt. She just looked tired. I'm sorry, Edward continued, his words coming out in a rush. I didn't listen to you. I should have. I was wrong. And I can't change what I did, but I need you to know that I understand now. I see what I did, and I'm sorry. For everything. Maya still didn't speak. She just watched him, her gaze steady, unwavering. Edward shifted his weight, suddenly feeling the weight of his own vulnerability. I don't know what I was thinking. You were right. About everything. And I should have believed you. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy, before Maya finally spoke, her voice soft but firm. I don't need your apology, Edward. I never did. Her words cut through him, not with anger, but with a quiet truth. She wasn't waiting for him to fix what he had broken. She wasn't waiting for him to make it right. She had already moved on, found her own way. Then why did you come? She asked, her eyes still searching his face. Because I needed to, he said quietly. I needed to show you that I understand. I needed to show you that I'm not the same person I was. Maya nodded almost imperceptibly. You don't have to prove anything to me. She stepped aside, opening the door just a little wider. You can go now, Edward. And just like that, the distance between them grew again. But this time, it wasn't because of anger or bitterness. It was because Maya had already found her own peace, her own way forward. She wasn't going to let him back in. Not in the way he wanted. Not in the way he expected. He took a step back, his heart heavy, but there was no more guilt, no more desperation, just understanding. I won't forget this, Edward said, his voice low, almost to himself. I won't forget what you did, and I'll do better. For what it's worth. Maya looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable, before she gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. Goodbye, Edward. And with that, she closed the door softly, leaving him standing on the threshold of the life he had almost lost. The cold air pressed in around him, but this time, it didn't feel so suffocating. He wasn't searching anymore. Not for forgiveness. Not for redemption. He had already seen it in her eyes. He turned and walked away, the sound of his footsteps steady and sure. He didn't know where he was going next, but he knew he couldn't go back. Not to who he was. Not to who he had been. Maya stood by the window, the soft light of the street lamp filtering through the blinds, casting long shadows on the floor. Outside, the city pulsed with life, but inside, everything felt still, quiet. She looked out at the lights, her breath steady, her hands resting at her sides. The world outside continued, relentless. But here, in this moment, there was only silence. Edward's footsteps echoed in her mind, fading as he walked away. The door behind her was still closed, the faint sound of it shutting lingering in the air. She exhaled slowly, a soft sigh escaping her lips. The room was dark now, save for the faint glow from the window, but it didn't feel empty. It felt full of what she had walked away from. Full of what she had chosen to leave behind. The light from the street lamp flickered, casting a brief, fleeting reflection on the glass. Maya's eyes remained on the horizon, but her mind was still. The world would keep turning, and in the quiet, she let it. The stillness stretched on, the city's hum far below, but above it all, there was peace. She didn't need to look back. Not anymore. The light faded out, and all that was left was the soft rhythm of her breath. Slowly, she turned away from the window, the shadows swallowing her figure as she disappeared into the quiet of her own thoughts.